the other side.
Hello, friends. Hi, Helen. Hi, Sefunmi.
Hello, how's it going?
How are you doing? It's so good to see you all. Welcome, audience. I see we have some folks who have tuned in through the YouTube live stream. If you could do us a favor and just let us know in the comments that you can see us and hear us, that would be great. We want to make sure that our audio and the video is coming through okay. And also let us know where you're tuning in from. We often get very global audiences for these events, so it's very exciting for us to hear the geography represented. So let us know if you can hear us and where you're tuning from. Jose, awesome. It's good to see you. Looks like we have some, looks like we're hearing, seeing the screen. My name is Ashley. I am with the Discover team at Teachable. And I'm so excited today to be joined by Helen and Sefunmi because the world of product management is both like not new, but it's a different identity than it has in the past, and it's something that our audience is really curious about. So I'm looking forward to kind of peeling back the curtain on the world of product management from two people who are experts in that space. Just to let everybody know the way these events typically work, I'll turn it over to Helen and Sefunmi. Feel free to keep your comments and questions coming in the chat, and I'll try to answer. I'll raise those. I'll basically be the audience proxy, so we'll raise those to Helen and Sefunmi, and we'll also have some time for Q&A at the end. There will be a replay available, so if you miss a nugget of wisdom or two, don't worry, you will be able to come back and replay this event. And stay tuned because Helen and Sefunmi have a pretty sweet deal for the course that they have on the Teachable site, which is linked right at the very top of your YouTube description. So check that out. And in the meantime, I will turn it over to Helen and Sefunmi. Take it away, friends.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Cool. Well, hi, everyone. Thank you so much for spending the next little bit of your time here with us. So again, I'm Helen. You can connect with me on Twitter or LinkedIn at Helen.
And I'm Sefunmi. You can connect with me on Twitter at Sefunmi.
And so, yeah, today we really want to talk about product management, what it actually means, but also how you go beyond just sort of the theory and the frameworks that I'm sure we are all familiar with, and how you can leverage those frameworks to ultimately land the job of your dreams.
Cool. So a little bit about me. So my name is Sefunmi, like I mentioned. Previously, I've been a product manager at Microsoft, where I worked on the smart connected peripherals team. So in the IoT space, so building like a universal Windows app to be able to control smart devices. So think about Alexa, but with Cortana. So that was an interesting, fun fact. I later on moved to a product role at Apple, where I worked on the iPhone 7 and 7 Plus. That was also another exciting portion of like my PM career. And then took my talents to Ecobee, the smart home company based out of Toronto, where I built out this entire software stack for the thermostat products. I'm also the author of How to Product, and I'll talk about that later on in this presentation, which is essentially a book on product management, which is why some of you are here. And yeah, I'm excited to be sharing some of the things that I've learned after working on some of these companies and also hiring product managers from my previous experience.
Okay, awesome. And I'm Helen. As you can see in my first image, there's just a bunch of rocks. That's because I actually have a background in earth science, so very non-technical, non-traditional. But afterwards, I break into product management. My first role was actually as a product manager at Zynga, where I was working on mobile games. Afterwards, I transitioned into Microsoft, where I have been working, I guess, for the last bit years on a bunch of various product teams ranging from Microsoft Edge and like the browser space all the way up until dev tools. And then lastly, my last sort of venture with Microsoft was also alongside GitHub, where I was working on GitHub Actions and just their extensions of DevOps tools. So very interesting, I guess, for me, because again, I do have a non-technical background. I don't know how to code. I still, don't want to learn how to code, but ultimately I was still working on really technical products. But I think similar maybe with some of you all, as you're trying to break into the product management space, it's about leveraging sort of those talents and being able to still convey that you have real world capability to the hiring managers. And that's why, both Sefunmi and I were super passionate about the space. And you'll also hear a lot more throughout the presentation, is that ultimately what we believe is that you need to go beyond just the theory. And so Sefunmi and I now both work on joincolab.io, so Colab, where we really facilitate team-based learning for tech. And we're happy to chat about that afterwards. But again, this is sort of built out of just our desire to give people such as ourselves the opportunity to really gain real world experience in ways that we feel like isn't really sufficient today. So again, stepping one step back to all why you are here for the next hour or so, and also why we're here with like Discover and the Teachable team. So again, we're going to be chatting a little bit about product management 101. Product management, super interesting space. You can talk to 10 different product managers. Hey, what do you do at work? And you'll get a different answer. Well, technically, it's also the same answer. They'll all tell you, oh, it's dependent on the team, dependent on the product, dependent on the company. But there really is sort of, I guess, drawouts and takeaways from that confusion and that vague space that is product management. And those are some of the things that we're going to be sharing with you today. Afterwards, we're then going to go into a little bit deeper of like understanding really the challenges of breaking into the industry. I think a lot of the times we read about product management and it's about product strategy or being able to, ship a product and defining the problem space. But how do you really build out your skills and show hiring managers and recruiters that, hey, I know the frameworks, I know the theory, but I actually know how to put it into practice as well. And so we'll share with you all of those things that we've learned in our careers and also what Sefunmi has learned through creating the How to Product book as well as the How to Product course. Lastly, the most important part, obviously, we'll talk about how you right now, today, without purchasing anything, can really overcome some of those challenges, as well as takeaways and just other free resources that we've crafted for this session. So thank you again so much. We hope that you take out your books and get ready to write some notes. And at this point, I wanted to hand it off to Sefunmi before I come back with the takeaways.
Cool. Awesome. Thank you so much, Helen. I'm happy to have you back. So cool. Thank you all so much for joining us today. And I'll be talking about product management. So if I had to deconstruct the role and what it feels like to be a product manager, so you see this bunch of shapes here. And it's essentially you as a product manager understanding what sort of vision you're trying to accomplish with the customer problem that you've identified. So product managers typically find customer problems and then find ways to solve them in the companies that they work for. It's all about identifying those opportunities and then building all of that to make sure that you're able to solve the problems for your customers. So it's taking that vision in your head after spending time understanding the problems, understanding the customer motivations, and then trying to figure out what are the building blocks that you sort of need to put together in order to form this vision. So a lot about product management is sort of like deconstructing this vague idea of where you want to be and where your company wants to be at, and then figuring out all those pieces. And some of those pieces could be technology, it could be the people that you're working with, it could be like research and all these other expertise that you're bringing together in order to form this vision. In addition, you can also think about it in the flip side, whereas by like you have a bunch of resources. So you're working at a tech company, you have a developer, you have a designer, and you have a problem. You're trying to figure out how can you use these resources to the best of your abilities to create some form of product vision that either the CEO of the company, either yourself, you've sort of come up with, or you as a team, you've tried to like figure out how to put together. So product management is a lot of that. So if you had to deconstruct it, even though when you ask 10 different product managers, they'll tell you different things, it's all about what this is, taking that vision and breaking it down and using those pieces to build that vision Or if you just have a bunch of resources and you're trying to work towards a particular goal, is how do you put those resources and use them in the best of your abilities to be able to form that vision. So hopefully you can follow along as I try to deconstruct this and break this down a little bit further. So you can then think about product management being broken down into direction versus execution, right? So a lot of times, Helen mentioned there's the strategy piece and there's also the execution piece. So direction is sort of like that. So if you think about product direction, it's about defining a product vision. And a product vision is just essentially something where you want the world to be like in the future by creating something tangible or solving a particular problem. So if you think about Uber, for example, their product vision is to make sure that people can move from place to place very effectively, safely, and more conveniently. And prior to Uber existing, there was nothing like that. You usually had to call on taxis. So you really think it takes a particular person to really come up with what that product vision is like and how do you build that out over a couple of years. And obviously it takes a lot of time to be able to define this product vision effectively. Next is also about validating solutions. So how do you go about what are the right ways to even know that the problem that you've identified is actually a key problem that you want to solve? So another important thing that product managers do is, can we validate something very quickly? Because it's all about solving customer problems and then figuring out solutions that you want to build. So direction is also taking some time to make sure that you're doing the right things and you can do it in a cheap way that's very low cost. So you're not spending a bunch of money and burning through your capital or cash. Lastly, direction is about de-risking failure. So if you're a product manager in a tech company, or if you're even the CEO of your own startup, which is sort of synonymous with what product management is, you're responsible for all the employees or all the resources that are at your disposal, which means working with developers, designers, people in marketing, customer support, and those people have salaries. And essentially, it's very expensive to maintain those salaries. So if you're using them, which we call resources in the tech industry, to build whatever product vision, you want to make sure that there's no risk involved with building that out. Because if you spend a bunch of time building something that nobody wants to use, essentially you're wasting those resources. And then if you fail, you've pretty much burned through all of that stuff. So even though you're not burning through cash, you're actually burning through people's time, which also equates to money when you think about paying salaries. So if you're a good product manager and you're thinking about the direction, is trying to make sure that whatever you're projecting for the future, whatever idea that you've sort of come up with or the problem that you validated is worth working on and is worth a bunch of people's time to build and invent that future that you're trying to come up with. And then the next piece about product management is execution. And today, this is what majority of the product management roles that you find. A lot of it is about execution, while direction is really reserved for the people who have been in the industry for 5-10 years, thinking ahead about what is the society or the economy going to be like. So it really takes a lot of experience to be able to understand how to dictate the direction of your product or your company. So with the execution side, it's about building things the agile way. So if you're thinking about a software product and you're trying to bring that to life, and that's part of your product vision, it's all about how do you make sure you're building this agile way. And by the agile way, I mean making sure that there's continuous improvement, you're reducing waste, and you're making sure you're managing the resources properly. So you're working in short-term goals or short-term sprints with your cross-functional team, and you're trying to make sure that every time you reach sort of short-term milestones, so you can move yourself closer to that product vision, so you can test out whatever theories and whatever things that you've been able to build. Execution is also about shipping to customers very, very frequently. So you always hear about the concept of an MVP. What is an MVP? And an MVP is sort of like a minimum viable product, which is sort of like the smallest set of things that you can give your customer to make sure that it's able to solve the problem, right? So a lot of you are Teachable users who have your courses in there. So the Teachable MVP could maybe look like just one particular product offering where you're able to just upload videos and slides. So none of the other fancy stuff that they do. So that helps you as a creator put your content online so your students can actually learn from that. So that's a way for you to think about how do you come up with features to ship to your customers, and how do you do that iteratively so they can continually get value. So you don't try to build everything in one go. You try to build things iteratively and periodically so you can get that value to your customers. Lastly, execution is all about feedback. So I mentioned when you're shipping to customers, you need to do it in an iterative way because it's important that you ship something to your customers, and then the next piece is to get feedback from that customer to understand, how are they using it? Is it confusing for them? Is it straightforward? What are the things that are clear? What are the things that are not clear? So you can go back to your product team, take those insights, and then make the product a lot better. So even if you think about Uber, the example that I gave previously, it didn't have all the features that you see today. It started with like a very simple feature to just like call a taxi or call a black cab, and then you're able to move from place to place. And then eventually it came up with things such as like, Uber Pool, where you can actually share stuff with other people and split your bill with other people. You can then share your ETA with a bunch of other people. Then there's rewards. So all of that doesn't happen overnight. It takes regularly talking to your customers and getting feedback on how you can build your features. And product managers are actually in charge of this. So if you think about any top tech company in the world, they have product managers that are either dictating the direction or the execution of a particular product. So it's very important that you really understand the distinction and you know where your strengths lie, and you're trying to pick up all the things that you need to start. So I recommend to get a lot of execution experience, build that up, build a bunch of products, ship a bunch of software, or solve a bunch of customer problems before going into the direction phase. So now when I want to talk about how do you even become a product manager? So a lot of times when I was early in my career, like many, many years ago, a lot of people reach out to me and they were asking me these same three questions, which is, hey, how did I get into my current role? Because at the time I just graduated from college or university and I landed a product management job like right after, which was very, very uncommon back in the day. So I got asked a lot, how do I get into my current role? I also asked what my typical day was like. What do I spend a lot of time doing? Because it's very interesting as product managers, it's like you don't really know what they do. So how do you really spend your time? And lastly, I got asked if I had any tips for aspiring product managers. So some of you in the audience might be looking for how you can land that first product management role, or how you can eventually work through your career to end up being a product manager. So these questions kept on coming up, several times over and over again as I had dozens of coffee chats with a lot of people. And then I didn't really think too much of it until I really took a step back to really understand what is the hype around product management? Why do people seem like they want to be product managers? And according to the Wall Street Journal, they published an article back in 2016 whereby they mentioned that people go to MBAs, and it was one of the most coveted roles for the people who graduate from MBAs, that they want to become product managers. And I don't have an MBA, but I was able to be a product manager, and MBAs cost tens of thousands of dollars. Some schools, you can even go up to like hundreds of thousands of dollars. So immediately I felt like how privileged I was, that, wow, I really broke into product management very early. So I started asking myself, what can I do to be able to help people get into product management, similar to how I was able to break into product management? So that's when I wrote the How to Product book, which we launched on Product Hunt last year. So the way I approached this book is I reached out to 40 product management managers from non-traditional backgrounds. So people who are not necessarily have a technical background or have an engineering degree or know how to code. So try and just understand the variation of where do people come from. Is there any commonalities that actually make people product managers? Next, I then told 25 stories of how people, out of the 40, told 25 stories of how people landed their very first product management role. So all the things that they did, their tips, their tricks, their strategies, their struggles on how they're able to land that role. And then I also talk about the 10 essential traits that I found amongst pretty much all of the people that I interviewed, to really encourage people that, hey, if you have these traits, those are the signs that you'll be a great product manager, or here are some other traits for you to work on if you're trying to be a successful product manager. And then I broke down 5 key themes that I saw in all of these 40 folks on how you can actually transition into product management, whether it's like you're fresh from school, out of college, or you're already working in tech, or you already have an existing job. So we launched that book last year, and it was able to be the #1 product on the Product Hunt when we launched it in April of last year. So it was a really great experience to that, which sort of led me into the path of then creating the How to Product course, which is what I'll talk about a little later in the presentation. So if I had to sort of like break down some of the things that I learned from all my conversations and all my books, it's like there's this challenge of getting into product management. And it's also true for a lot of other careers that people are in, which is, hey, I can't get the job without the experience, but I need the experience to get the job. So people find themselves in this catch-22, and specifically for product management is extremely difficult because it's the one particular role where it's very hard to really take a chance on someone who doesn't have a proven track record of actually shipping products and actually being able to work on a cross-functional team. So this is what a lot of my coffee chats were centered around, that, hey, I can't really get the experience without the job. I need the experience. How can I get experience? How can I land that first product management role? I then took a step back to really talk to employers and hiring managers to really understand, like, what do they want from their ideal product manager candidates? So these were like startup CEOs, product hiring managers, and recruiters. And I've also been part of the hiring process in previous companies. So I also got an insight as to, like, what do we look for? And then pretty much they had all of these questions, which were, can I trust you? So trust was a big thing. So if you think about the roles and responsibilities of a product manager that I mentioned earlier with the direction and the execution, I trust someone who doesn't have any experience with all of my resources, which can obviously add up to over $1 million to be able to ship a product. So that was one thing that was lingering at the back of hiring managers. Another thing was mentorship. Product managers requires a lot of mentorship if you don't have that experience. So a lot of times with companies that are smaller or startups, they don't really have time to, spend time to invest and mentor a lot of junior folks who are trying to break into technology. But in the bigger companies, you definitely have a lot of that mentorship because you have, PM managers who are actually just mentor the new generation, and they're not actually focused on shipping stuff. But of course, if you want to go to a Microsoft or a Facebook or an Apple, a lot of those jobs are very competitive. So that mentorship was a big part. Lastly, what is your growth potential? Even since I hire a lot of product managers in my previous companies, I also try to understand what their growth potential is. So I talked about direction and execution. You see some folks who have a lot of strength in execution, but they need help building the direction. Or you can see that they have that product vision and they need to build a little bit more of the execution. So interviewing someone with experience allows us to be able to understand what that growth potential is. But in the absence of that, you're really taking a bet on whether or not the person has that potential. Lastly, is it worth the risk? Similar to the trust there, it's like, am I going to spend a lot of my resources for my company, giving it to an inexperienced product manager to ship a product? So that costs a lot of money. And if the person doesn't end up shipping the product, then you lose time, you lose money, you lose a bunch of stuff. So honestly, it's a big risk. So a lot of employers are already hesitant to hire people who don't have a lot of experience. And essentially, we can summarize it in this one particular question that they're trying to answer, which is, do you really have that practical knowledge beyond all of the theory that you've learned? So all of that real world applicability, do you have all of that? Because right now, the way people learn is very theory-based. And the reason why we have this talk is going beyond the theory. Because if you think about learning about product management, there's a lot of frameworks, blogs, articles, podcasts, but not really something you can action on. And especially product managers, you don't really deliver something on your own. You actually need to work with a cross-functional team in order to deliver something. So it's very difficult to have experience by just reading a book or reading a blog post or even taking a course, which is why we took a different approach into how do we design an experience that can actually give people the practical real-world experience that they need to learn product management. So now I actually wanted to share the story of Mark from my book with you all and sort of what he did. So Mark wanted to be a product manager, and he was previously a photographer, an event planner, and a video game producer. So he was sort of like a jack of all trades. He did a bunch of stuff early on in his career, and he sort of learned about product management, and he really wanted to be a PM. So essentially, what he tried to do was I want to go out there and shadow real product managers. That was his first step. It was I want to see how they talk, how they solve problems. So what he did was he cold emailed a bunch of PMs and he said, look, I'll work for free. I will literally clean toilets, grab coffees, do whatever it is, so I can actually be in the same room as you. I really want to really understand. I'll do anything. And of course, they wouldn't let you clean toilets or grab coffees. And one of the companies that he was actually reaching out to was based out of San Francisco, and he lived in Toronto. So he took a plane ride on his own dime, slept on his buddy's couch to go through going to the work every day 9 to 5 to really understand how product managers talk and how they solve problems. And through that, he was able to identify the gaps in his own skills. So he will be in these meetings where product managers will talk about the things that they were doing. He will really have this journal of like writing all the things that he learned. And then if there was anything he didn't understand, he'll write it down and try and figure it out. He sort of like treated it as like this treasure quest game type of thing to really figure out all the skills that he was missing. He's kept his ideas, kept his progress in his book, and he was really trying to wait for that opportunity to showcase to a hiring manager that he really has that experience and has been able to learn a lot. So one of the things that he ended up doing was after gaining a lot of that experience, he then went on to reach out to a lot of hiring managers, and then he worked on a project for them. So he identified 5 companies that he was interested in, and he worked on a small project, built like a small website where he then sent it to the CEOs, and that is how he was able to land into product management. And I'm telling you this story because, like, similar to not just Mark, but similar to everyone in my book, they all started with a small project that solved a specific problem. So whether or not they were already in a company and they were trying to land a product management role from like customer support or something, or they were just trying to like break into the industry for the very first time, they all worked on a project that they were able to show hiring managers and say, hey, it's not just all the theory that I've learned. I have the experience. I've been able to like build this project. I've been able to work on this website or solve this particular customer problem, similar to how you all are creating content and you're creators that help give people knowledge and help solve problems for them. They're able to showcase all the strengths that they have. And I think that speaks a lot of volumes with hiring managers. And it actually sets you off for being a very good product manager. The fact that you can really take the initiative to be able to solve that problem. Because in reality, you really learn by creating ideas and validating them. So as product managers, that is pretty much what we do a lot of the times. So there are times where we ship products that are not successful. But ultimately, it's the process of shipping it and learning from that for us to really know if we're able to be successful. Because I mean, you can't get it right every single time. Even the best of product managers still make mistakes whenever they ship products. But ultimately, they want you to know that you have the ability to actually ship a product on a cross-functional team, which is one of the most important things that you can actually do as a product manager. So if I had to really summarize, if anyone out there who's trying to be a product manager and sort of like you're trying to go on this path, I encourage you all to pick a real problem, right? It could be anything. It could be a problem that you've experienced, your friends have experienced, problems that you're very just like you're aware of in your surroundings. Pick that problem. Find a solution to that problem. Try and figure out what can you do to solve that problem, whether it's like a product, whether it's a service, or whether it's like a mixture of both. How can you find a solution to that problem that you've been able to identify for yourself or for your stakeholders, and then pretty much ship it? And by ship it, I mean solve that problem, like build out the solution. It's not enough to say that like, okay, in order to come up with like Uber, I need to create an app to help people move from place to place. You need to actually ship it and prove that it actually solves that problem. So this is what product managers do on a day-to-day basis. This is what our jobs have been for many years. We pick problems, we find solutions, and we ship it. And when we ship it to our customers, we really then try to understand if it's actually solved the problem. So we ask for feedback if there's any problems with the solution, and then we go back to this entire flow, which is we're picking a real problem, we're finding a solution, and we're shipping it. So this is essentially the formula for great product management. So if you really want to be a product manager, you really repeat these things to yourself, pick a real problem, find a solution, and ship it. So to do this, I've broken this down in 3 ways. So this is how we've actually structured the How to Product course and all the things that we do at Collab. So in the first phase, where you're sort of like picking a problem, it's all about defining what that problem is. So Albert Einstein said, if I had 1 hour to solve a problem, I'll spend 55 minutes really understanding that problem and only 5 minutes trying to solve it, because problems are filled with a lot of clues on how to solve them. So it really takes a very good product manager to define that problem absolutely very, very clearly. It's very important for you to be able to do that, because you want to make sure that you're not solving the wrong problem for your customers, because customers can tell you a bunch of things. It's up to you to really understand what are the main things they're complaining about. Next, you need to validate that with real users. So it's not enough for you to say, I have an idea for an app and I want to build it. No, what problem are you trying to solve? You need to make sure you're going out there and talking to real customers, because it's not just about you. You're not going to be your only user. So you need to make sure that customers are giving you that green light that, oh, this makes sense. This is a real problem that they're going through. So by the time you're solving it for them, you're able to sort of cross-reference that and give them that solution to know if you've actually solved the problem. Lastly, you want to prototype solutions. So prototyping here doesn't necessarily mean having to build something. You can actually sketch stuff out on paper and show it to people to see if it resonates with them and it's something that they're able to understand. So in this first phase, you're really just trying your best to align on what exact problem they have before you move on to the next phases, which is actually figuring out that solution. So prototyping it is supposed to be a way where you can learn very quickly. So the things that you learn from this phase is understanding the why. So the reasons why product managers do the things that they do are more important than the what and then the how. Because ultimately, you need to be able to like set that direction, because that direction is basically what leads all the things that you're doing. If anyone asks you, why are you building this? You understand why you're doing that. And that helps you when you want to motivate your team, when you're talking to upper management or stakeholders as to why you're doing the things that you're doing. Next, you also take that initiative to solve problems. Again, if you want to be a product manager and if you want to stand out, it's all about the initiative to say, look, you're able to identify a problem and then solve it for real customers. So you're not being told what to do. It's not about following instructions, because as product managers, there's no real blueprints or instructions for all the things that you need to do. You're sort of like creating that on your own. So you need to be able to showcase that you have that initiative. Next, you're also able to test out ideas by sketching things out, showing it to a bunch of people. You're trying to really understand if that problem is actually legit, and before you actually invest a lot more time. So it goes back to de-risking that failure if you're in the direction phase. In the phase 2, when you want to find a solution, you want to then find a team of people. So we actually encourage you to go out there and work with people, work with designers, work with developers to actually start to build out the solution. Because again, you're not going to be the one that will code the product. You're not going to be the one that will design it. So you need to be able to find a cross-functional team that will be able to help you out. Then you need to build out this MVP. So think about what is the one feature that you need to build first. So if you only build one thing in the world, if you only had time and resources for one thing, what is that? That is your MVP that you want to spend a lot of your time on and your resources to make sure that by the time you ship it to people, you're able to know that if you've solved the problem or not. Next thing, you are able to test your solution with that MVP. And so your MVP doesn't have to be this full-fledged product with like so many features. If you just solve one problem for the customer, and then you know if you're actually on the right path. Next, what you learn in this phase is to be able to develop your resourcefulness. So, as product managers, you never have enough resources to do all the things that you're supposed to do. Your customers have infinite problems, and you only have the team that you have at your disposal to be able to solve that problem. So you need to be very resourceful on how do you manage the development team or the design team that you have, which is also very critical for product managers. You can also get to understand how to scope problems, right? So when you're determining what your MVP is, it's one of the hardest things that you can do. So scoping it down is an art that you get to build on over the years to come. So it's important that you understand how to really scope it down to the simplest problem that you can solve for your customers. And next, you'd also learn to user test. So user test is the act of putting your solution in front of customers, having them use it, and giving you feedback of if it's actually solved their problem or not. So by the time you've built out an MVP, it's very important and critical to be able to do that. So you'll be able to learn that in this phase. In the phase 3, which is obviously the most exciting phase, where you get to actually ship it, we encourage you to iterate from your user feedback. So once you've actually put out the MVP out in the world, and a lot of people say if you're not embarrassed by the MVP that you ship, then you ship too late. So when people get to use it, they get to give you that feedback about, oh, this could be better. This wasn't clear enough. Can you improve this flow? And you get a lot of insights on how you can improve your product and add a bunch of features that will help solve the problem further. You'd also get to launch your product and get real users. Getting real users is also one of the most important things to do. As a product manager, you want to make sure that you're shipping something to people and getting into the hands of them very quickly. Next, you also get to build out your roadmap, and your roadmap is just essentially the things that you want to do moving forward. After the MVP stage, what are the other things that you want to build consequently as you continue to solve problems for your customers? So the learnings here pretty much understanding the product development lifecycle. So you would be able to successfully go through that process of picking a real problem, finding a solution, and shipping it, which is end-to-end product management. So if you're able to do this, then congrats, you're able to understand the entire product development lifecycle of what companies like Teachable, Microsoft, and Apple use to be able to build the products that they do today. Next up, it's also about learning product strategy. So as you learn, iterate from user feedback, you're able to really understand how to make better decisions whenever you're trying to determine the product direction. And then lastly, you get to ship a real product, right? This is one of the most exciting and the most rewarding parts of product management, is that you're able to ship something that can impact people's lives. People can actually use it. People can give you feedback. People can use it to, like, whether solve their problem, get food, learn, educate themselves. You can unlock a bunch of different applications with the problems that you solve for people, which is why product management is such a rewarding career to be in. So next up, I wanted to then pass it on to Helen to talk about sort of the next steps after this. So welcome back, Helen.
So, my main job here is to really give Sefunmi a break from chatting and sort of giving all of those insights. And, there's a lot of next steps. So before I actually click further, I did want to say that, again, breaking into product management is no easy feat. It's hard. And I'm sure if some of you are already in your sort of seeking journey, you're struggling to really land, an interview or ultimately a job. And even though sometimes, even for me, especially for me, I was seeing all of these things as requirements on job postings and thinking, I feel like I have that, right? But I wasn't getting any luck. And so ultimately, it is a hard thing to do. And as with most hard things are tackled with hard work. And so I think overall, that is sort of the main takeaway that we want you all to have through this, is that, hey, you're undergoing something really difficult. Career pivoting in general is very difficult. And so, of course, we wish we could give you some of those tactics like, tweak your resume this way, or, get referrals, all of which are great recommendations to sort of land that first product management job. But ultimately, it still comes back to experience. Right? Having relevant experience, tangible experience under your belt is what is going to translate to your resume, your application, and also ultimately your interview and then on the job. So I just did want to call that part out there, because I know that it's not what we want to hear, is that, there's a lot to do. But there really is a lot to do in order to prepare you, and also in order to make sure that recruiters and hiring managers see you with the capabilities that you really already do have. And so again, next steps from sort of what Sefunmi has highlighted throughout this entire workshop is that, one, if you have your notebook, start thinking about that interesting idea, right? So what is something in your life that you've struggled with, or that you're seeing other people sort of struggle with? Through our collab program and also the people who have taken our course, we've seen a bunch of interesting ideas pop up. We've seen people work on projects about accessibility, about working with nonprofits, and just other interesting spaces that you wouldn't think about unless you're you. One of the things about finding an interesting idea for yourself is that it also highlights your individuality and also your creativity, right? Ultimately, hiring managers are still looking to hire you for you, right? And also the twist and the flavor that you bring in to any problem solving situation. And so you really want to find an idea that is personal to you, but you're also able to define and sort of prove out with data. Step number 2, of course, if you can, is to try to work with others with different skills. So again, as a product manager, if you take a step back, you can find an interesting idea, right? At which point we would say, hey, write a spec, sort of think about the problem space, maybe do a few customer interviews. But that's just one part of a product manager's job, especially when you're a little bit more junior in career. Ultimately, hiring managers, your managers, aren't going to trust you immediately with setting up this entire product strategy for the entire company. That's just not realistic, right? But what they will want to see is your ability to actually execute with a team, and your ability to sort of figure out those cross-functional learnings with the people that you'll ultimately work with. So if you have people in your network, or if you don't yet already, go on LinkedIn, start finding people who are sort of in your similar space, who might want to break in, or just other people that you can find in whatever meetups that you tend to go to. So just try to find people that you can actually grab, and you can align to the vision of what you're trying to build, and really build something out with one another. Again, collaboration is at the root of product management. So being able to collaborate with someone from different backgrounds, so a developer, designers, market research, marketers, that will be so key that you can then use on your resume to say that you do have the ability to sort of work across all different types of technical backgrounds. I wanted to call that out there because for me especially, because I didn't have a technical background, I struggled to find people, and I also struggled to sort of be able to tell people that, hey, I have the ability to work with technical people. So the best way to do that is to find a group of people to keep them accountable to one another, right? So if you find other 2 developers, work together and just really get the job done in really building something real. Again, connecting to that is really building that network of similar-minded folks. So everyone who's on this call, if you all have a chance to connect with each other, we really suggest that you do, in addition with the 2 of us. Again, this is part of sort of building up your network, especially if you're junior in career. I think knowing that others are going through it alongside you is really important. And especially when you're trying to build out just that team that you're actually going to work with to build out your side projects. Obviously, I think this is finding a mentor, something that I'm sure you all have heard a lot, but it's especially important as well when you're really crafting that real world experience under your belt. Finding a mentor in the product management space, or even just a product leader, even if they're a product owner or like a technical project manager. A bunch of people in the industry do have experience sort of crafting and working in an agile manner. And so having any sort of mentor that is in the space can give you a lot of direction towards how you're going to frame your project, but also frame your resume and maybe ultimately decide on the places you really do want to work. Lastly, this is actually not the last bullet point because we have one more, but the 2 things that hopefully you are taking away from this presentation that Sefunmi has really shared throughout is that ultimately hiring managers want to see your credibility. It's not just about your certifications, and it's not just about the frameworks you have under your belt and like what you know. I think ultimately we can all say we know a lot, but ultimately it's about your ability to share and to show that you know certain things. And so proving that you have this real world experience through some of the tactics that we just shared about finding an idea, working with others, building something real, and really showcasing that you have built something real. Ultimately, that's the hard work that is going to give you the real world experience that people really want to see beyond the theory and beyond sort of the fundamentals and the frameworks. So again, we know that this is a lot, but time and time again, we have seen our students, we have seen the people that Sefunmi has interviewed, who are now product leaders at top companies. We have seen this model succeed because ultimately it goes back to proving that you have real world experience. Because nothing can trump that experience. Nothing can trump the learnings that you have as part of that experience. So again, if you are interested, we do have our own program, so Collab, where you are able to actually ship a product. So in addition to the course on Teachable that we have, you'll be able to sort of take all of those learnings to the next step. Again, on our Teachable course, we already sort of speak to each of the components that Sefunmi shared, but giving you space to actually start crafting that on your own. But if you don't have that community like I didn't at the beginning of my career, and you're looking for others to sort of build along with, we do have our program where we match you with industry mentors, we match you with a team to ultimately build out what it is that you wrote in the spec. Again, we've seen over 200 students now go through the program, really high success rate, and just really interesting to see the types of projects that as well. So feel free to go to our website and even take a look at the projects, even if they just give you inspiration for what you can build out on your own. And again, for sitting through our Discover sort of programming, we also wanted to share with you all our booklets. So in addition to Sefunmi's How to Product book, we've actually created a set of booklets on how to break into product management, software development, as well as product design. Again, this is all free, so feel free to go on and just give it a download. In there, you have a bunch of stories, up to 15 stories about how non-traditional people broke into product management from different fields. So journalism, mechanical engineering, or just mechanics, photography, all of that other stuff. So people who don't necessarily have that CS background, but were able to make the switch by proving their real world applicability and experience. And lastly, don't forget to connect with the two of us. Sefunmi is awesome. Again, he wrote an entire book. So he has a bunch of learnings that he likes to share on Twitter and LinkedIn and stuff like that. And I'm also happy to connect to help you make any connections that you might need with developers that you want to work with or just whatever other stuff. Again, the two of us, we are two non-traditional technologists in tech. So ultimately, what we are really passionate about is just empowering people to have those same learnings that we had through our career. But yeah, once again, thank you all so much for sitting here with us. We hope that this helped and that you were able to take a bunch of notes. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Thank you, Helen. Thank you, Sefunmi. This is such terrific information. We have had a handful of questions come in, so I would love to kind of continue the conversation with some things that have come up in the chat. So specifically, on a personal note, our friend Wami would like to know what resources you all recommend for folks who are breaking into product, like aside from the amazing booklets that you just offered and the resources that you all create. Who do you read? Who do you follow? Is there anybody that you that whose guidance you sort of sought on your own paths that might be useful for folks just starting out to look into?
Oh yeah, so I'll go first. I know that in my product management interview journey, I heavily relied on a book called Cracking the PM Interview. Amazing book. I sort of read it like beginning back to front multiple times. It's great. So highly recommend reading that book if you're in the interview process. As for application of just product management theory, I personally found, and now I read a bunch of like resources online, a bunch of newsletters, but as I was trying to get into the industry, sometimes I found a bunch of resources and reading a little bit overwhelming, especially because I couldn't actually apply it to what I was doing. And so my recommendation would be to really understand where you are in the PM process, whether you're trying to learn a lot or whether you're just trying to learn on the job, because I do think that those are a little bit different in terms of the resources we'd share.
Yeah. And I think for me, one of the things I can find super valuable is actually reading how companies solve problems. So a lot of companies actually talk about and blog about their processes, about, this is sort of how we do product management. This is how we solve this problem. This is how we built a particular feature. I find that to be very helpful because that's usually a reflection of what happens. It's not always 100% accurate because obviously every company wants to act that like they're perfect and, everything goes smoothly. But I do think that's like a better representation versus people who are just writing about just like frameworks and whatever, and it's just like all of those things are fluff. So reading about those company blogs are usually very, very good. So I usually recommend Amplitude. I recommend Intercom. I read a lot of their blogs and a lot of the content that they put out, and I think that also helps me to see, this is how this other company makes sort of like those decisions.
I love that advice. It's almost just an extension of the research process you would engage in if you were looking into a job for any company, really doing your due diligence and figuring out how they approach something like problem solving gives you clues as to how they would, what they might be looking for in a product manager. It feels like a good fit, something that would actually suit what you're looking for, right? That's great advice. So speaking of identifying ways that companies solve problems, we've also had a couple of questions about, especially I think for non-technical folks, how you can go about demonstrating to those technical folks, engineers, PMs, or other coders, et cetera, how you engage in problem solving if you don't have that technical background. So for example, Paola is asking, like, how do you actually build that trust with engineers? So I'd love to hear, Helen, your thoughts on how you do that specifically as a non-technical person. Mm-hmm. And then just more broadly as a product manager, how do you cultivate that, like, with both the folks who are engineers that you might be working with and the folks that you might be reporting to? How do you cultivate trust in both directions?
Mm-hmm. That's a great question. And so again, absolutely something that I struggled with. And one thing just I wanted to call out before answering is that I know for a lot of my non-technical friends out there, you might feel some type of imposter syndrome or just, you're not capable for a certain role or another. but I really urge you all to just apply anyway. Don't undersell yourself when you're applying for jobs. Let them do that for you. But I think it's also about recognizing that the unique perspectives that you bring, even though they're non-technical, are very much applicable to different types of customers, especially when you're trying to build for a global audience. Your customers most likely are not going to be technical. So you need to bring that unique perspective into the space and understand that that has value. So I just wanted to say that first and foremost. In terms of actually building trust on your product team, ultimately, I think what really worked for me is having one-on-ones with my developers. So anytime that I switch to a new company, just building close personal relationships with your developers will make you feel a lot more comfortable in asking them the hard questions. So that was really helpful. Number two was understanding that, hey, even though I don't have that technical expertise, the numbers don't lie. So if you have data to actually back up the decisions and recommendations that you're making, that is going to go beyond any sort of biased or subjective opinion that you might have. And I think being able to do that made me feel a lot better, and that, hey, the recommendations that I'm making are strong. They're data backed, and being able to showcase that qualitative and quantitative information that I've gathered from customers was also part of what ultimately allowed me to build trust with the people that I work with, in terms of having them understand that, hey, this is a good recommendation.
And you, of course, don't have to have a technical background to listen to your audience and calculate some of their feedback on different questions. I love. So my favorite thing about this role is that I've been able to identify some patterns working with a lot of the different Discover creators who are sharing knowledge in different fields. And you all are demonstrating what my background was worked at TED as a speaker coach. And we talk a lot about audience-centered communication and how do you develop an idea focusing on your audience first rather than yourself as a speaker first. And I'd heard you all say a ton of things that were really of the same philosophy, which is if you can demonstrate that you have really understood a problem that your audience or your customers have, that you've gone through due diligence and understanding both what the audience thinks they might need as a solution to that problem, and then also what might, what might actually work versus what might actually not, and how you can create a solution that serves those needs. It really is kind of just like a re-emphasis of paying attention to your audience. And you might not be have a technical background, but Helen, like you're saying, you can build trust with people by demonstrating that you care about the customers or the audience or whomever, however you define it. I appreciate that. Just a tiny, we only have a couple minutes left, but I'm curious about any specific recommendations for where people could go to look for PM jobs. So you mentioned a little bit about identifying what specifically is interesting to you as an individual. Can you just kind of maybe share some examples, maybe Sefunmi, from your writing or the stories that you've collected? What are some of the unexpected places that people can look for a role in product management?
Yeah, for sure. I think one thing that I always recommend is, despite a lot of people always play the numbers game and try to apply to as many companies as possible, I really like Mark's approach, where he literally just picked 5 companies. He was like, I want to do anything and everything to get in front of someone, right? So it's also easier to sell yourself to someone over like a call or over a coffee versus like with a resume. Because if you're applying online, you're dropping it into the ether. We've been part of hiring in our previous companies, and we all know referrals are usually at the top of the stack. So we usually go through a bunch of referrals first before you even end up with someone who's just like cold applying. So I always recommend, once you pick those 5 companies, do anything to get their attention, which means it could be working on a project. I know I saw a comment that's like saying, like, could you work on a no code solution to something? You can do that, put that on your resume, or have that URL somewhere. cold email someone or add someone on LinkedIn and send a note to them, typically people will like click on that, and if it's interesting enough, they'll send you like a note to just like, have a conversation, and usually ask for about like 15 minutes, because 15 minutes is like not that much time. So some people will really reach out and like get to understand. So that's what I would sort of like recommend. Another more tactical thing is, if you look for startups at a particular size, typically the CEOs are usually the product managers, but the CEOs are also very busy. They have fundraising, they have to think about a lot of things. So at a particular size of a company, so take a look at maybe just like, Crunchbase, all the companies that are sort of like pre-seed to seed, and you can see like hundreds of them on like Crunchbase, and they'll be getting to a stage where they're looking for like a product manager or someone to like come in to help with the development, because at that time they have already determined what their product direction is for the next year. So they just need someone who can work with the engineers, work with the designers to like build something. So they're also looking to offload some of the things that they want to do. So if you're also passionate about the problem that they're trying to solve, I think it's also a very good way for you to pitch them and say, hey, you're a cycling company. I go cycling like every morning. I do this. I change my own tires. I use all these apps. I'm the perfect person for this. Look at this no-code thing that I built. I want to be a PM. And oftentimes you hear a lot of like, yes, this is like the right time. This is the right approach. So it really takes you figuring out what is special and unique about you, reaching out to some of those companies that have those similar interests, and then pitching yourself. And I do think that that's like a good formula that I've seen a lot of people actually, use to get the roles of their dreams. So you're not just like getting another PM job, you're getting a PM job in a product that you love working on with people that you respect, and it's just like a much better experience.
Yeah, I love that. That resonates a lot. Honestly, that's as you're talking, I'm thinking like, even though it's not I've never had a role that is technically a product manager role. Every job I've ever had has been some version of me saying, here's why I'm passionate about what you're doing and what I can bring to the table in terms of how I understand the problem you are navigating and what experiences I've had that will help me find a solution for the folks that you're serving. So that I think that's really that's just like good career advice, but specifically in a product management role, being able to identify the ways in which you are uniquely qualified to help solve a problem, and usually really caring about that problem is like step one, right? This is really terrific. Audience would love to have any final questions that you have. Feel free to drop those in. But please join me in thanking Helen and Sefunmi for this like information, advice-packed session that we just had. There will be a replay available. So if you missed anything, don't worry. We'll send that out to everyone. Also, I've dropped the link to their course in the chat. I'm going to drop it one more time. So also check it out. There's like a pretty sweet discount available right now. I think the course usually goes for $2.99, and you guys are offering it to this crowd for $1.99 for the rest of the week, right? So definitely take advantage of that. I think, like I was saying before, the advice that they're offering is terrific for any kind of career switch. And specifically, if you're curious about product management, you've got two like stone cold experts here who know how it's done and have done it themselves, and also worked with lots of folks and are generously sharing the stories of lots of other folks who have found successful careers in product management. So thank you both so much. Any final words of wisdom or advice, Helen, Sefunmi, that you want to share with our crew today?
I would just say, keep it up. I know that sometimes it can be really hard, but just the fact that you all have tuned in to something like this means that you're on the right track. So there are people that believe in you, and you can do it. That's why.
Yeah, and thank you so much for having us. Like, I think I always like to remind people that they're extremely capable, and if you really give people the opportunity to be creative, they will be. And I think that's one of the things that we try our best to do at Collab, to foster such an environment where we want to unlock potential. So definitely find that environment that you belong to, and we want to let everyone know that they belong in tech. So thank you so much for having us. This was like such a great time, and yeah, enjoyed speaking about product management.
Love that. And don't forget, if you get out there and end up in a new product management role, drop Helen and Sefunmi a line and let them know what cool new gig you're working with. Wami, who is also a product manager in our audience, and to all the other folks out there who have shared some of their wisdom in the chat, thank you all for doing that. If you are into this kind of content, learning from creators from the Teachable platform, don't forget to like and subscribe to the Discover page. You'll be the first to know when we have these amazing experts like Helen and Sefunmi who are just generously giving of their time and knowledge. And we will be able to see you at the next one. Thanks everyone for joining us. Helen and Sefunmi, if you can stick around for a minute. Hope you have a great rest of your day and good luck on that search. Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.